role in greenhouse gas emissions. But Canada is really looking at developing a regulatory framework in the past where, provide cost-effective measures for people and provide incentives for people to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. And they're looking at using offset credits to ensure compliance to a regulatory regime. Now, Canada at one point did develop some draft regulations with respect to an offset system for greenhouse gases. However, in November of 2010, the Senate killed the climate bill passed by the House of Commons. So at this point, there is no regulatory framework federally for a cap and trade system or carbon finance. That being said, there's a number of provincial governments, and pretty much every province right now is taking a role in mitigating greenhouse gases and the emissions from them. Most provinces have developed their own or implementing their own climate change mitigation legislation. A few examples, of course, was Ontario's Green Energy Act and Feed-in Tariff Program, BC's Carbon Trust Program, and other cap and trade systems. So what we're seeing provincially is that they are picking up where the federal government has not been able to move into the area. So the provinces themselves have been developing their own carbon finance regimes. And the other area that's out there right now is the Western Climate Action Initiative. And this is an initiative where at first in 2007, 5 states, being Arizona, California, New Mexico, Oregon, and Washington, signed an MOU to develop a climate action initiative. It was based on, it was market-based and it was a traded cap and trade system. British Columbia, Manitoba, Utah, Montana joined the initiative later on in 2007, and in 2008, Ontario and Quebec formally joined the Western Climate Action Initiative. In September of 2008, the Western Climate Action Initiative released its proposed design for a cap and trade system to reduce greenhouse gases by 15% below 2005 levels. And the Pew Climate Group was the advisory group for the states and the provinces. Really, when you look at it, the Western Climate Action Initiative is really a cap and trade system that is being be regulated by the various provinces. But they're looking at, the provinces that are included is quite substantial. I mean, it represents the total of 20% of the U.S. economy and 73% of Canada's economy. And also could incorporate roughly 50% of greenhouse gas emissions in Canada. So it is quite a substantial program. The WIC is set to commence in 2012, but at this point the provinces and the states are working together to develop a uniform registry, tracking systems, and the accounting mechanisms so that can be applied interjurisdictionally between Canadian provinces, the states. So they are working quite closely on this and developing their protocols as we speak. It's expected that each province and state that are signatories to the Western Climate Initiative will pass their own legislation, including any offset components. They're looking at 12 priority areas at the present time, but they intend to consult with various stakeholders in both Canada and the United States this year. At this point, I'm not sure if they actually developed a schedule when they'll actually be consulting, something we can check up on. But as we know right now, they do intend to consult. There's not a lot of First Nation involvement at the WCI. As far as we know right now in our discussions across Canada, we know that Wolf Lake First Nation is really the only First Nation that's involved in the initiative. And Wolf Lake has been encouraging other First Nations to sit on the board or sit on other areas with the WCI to ensure that First Nation interests are looked at. And I think that's a fairly important point. When you look at whatever the federal government has done in the past or what the provincial governments are doing now and even some of the voluntary funds, there's really not a lot of involvement of First Nation communities. And really what you see is a process in which governments, industry, environmental groups are trying to parcel up land for themselves, parcel up the forests, and trying to divvy up the carbon that's out there amongst themselves without really paying due regard to First Nation communities and the interests of First Nations. Many First Nations do assert that they have title to the land, title to the forests, and as title holders, obviously they're eligible to be to own the credits, any carbon credits that are out there, but also they should be consulted with and their interests accommodated by government and other actors. Now, carbon itself is becoming a very marketable commodity. In 2010, the carbon market was fairly valuable. In the regulated market, as you find in the European Union and other places, the value of carbon is estimated at about $136 trillion. For Alberta's carbon market, they're estimating that its current worth is about $61 million. And right now, the voluntary market's about $387 million. I should note, with respect to the voluntary market, in 2008, beginning of 2009, the voluntary market was valued at close to $700 million. But due to the financial collapse that happened internationally, the global voluntary market for carbon finance really lost half of their assets, or lost half of their worth. But at this point, it's still substantial numbers that are out there. And because of this, a lot of companies are out there, industry folks are looking for purchasing carbon credits to offset their emissions. So we're not talking about small change. It's a fairly substantial amount of money that's available for the carbon market at this point. Now, in the Canadian context, what the federal government was looking at in the past, and should a regulatory regime be reestablished, again, they're looking at various offset eligibility criteria for carbon finance. And of course, it would relate to all the greenhouse gas emissions, whether it be carbon, PFCs, nitrogen, that type of things, or methane, those types of gases. So they're looking at reductions within all the greenhouse gases that are out there. But part of the regime itself would be that there has to be some real identified actions that would result in a net reduction. Again, a lot of the carbon finance schemes out there are not looking at absolute reductions in carbon that's being emitted, but net reduction. There's a whole accounting procedures that are available to people that participate in cap and trade systems. But they're looking at some drops in the emissions of greenhouse gases. They are also looking at an incremental approach that projects will start at a staggered rate should a regulatory regime come into place. Not everyone will start at the same date, but in all cases there will be a start date of projects. There will be a period of time where emissions will have to be reduced. One of the criteria is that there has to be some additionality component to it, meaning that someone has to do more in the forest sense. Basically, you can't say, well, I'm selectioning off this part of the forest and I want to get credits from it. You have to do more than just preserve things the way they are. You have to take extra measures to ensure that you're entitled to credits, and that goes in line with surpassing the legal requirement. If, for instance, there's a regulatory framework regarding someone's industry saying that you have to, reduce your emissions for sulfur because of whatever reasons, if you're already legally required to do something, then you can't go back and try to claim credits for that. And essentially, in one of the other eligibility criteria is that the offset itself has to be quantifiable, and it has to be established using the protocols that are out there, whatever cap and trade system one is working with, that they have to meet those protocols. And with respect to verification, they're looking at independent verifiers who will be able to verify that you're following your plan of action, the scope of your project, and that the reductions of greenhouse gases are occurring. Again, offset project scopes. The steps in developing a project. Should a First Nation community or someone else decide to get involved in carbon finance and develop an offset program, essentially they would have to register with some body, whether it be with the WCI or some other program that's out there